Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode of the Geopolitical Pico. I am Juanfrey, as always your host, and as always I have my colleague Ronan Wordsworth in front of me. How are you doing, Ronan?
Very well, thanks, mate. How are you going?
Well, pretty fine.
This is coming up.
I'm really enjoying this early spring. I said it in a previous episode, but it's been some years living here in the Czech Republic and it's always been cold at this time. And the fact that I can go outside and enjoy it's definitely climate change. But, but I cannot really complain about it right now. And how have you been?
Very good, very good. Yeah, just doing some work, doing the same old, you know.
Same old. Let's go to what we are going to talk about today. Today, we're going to be talking about a potential new space race, or basically conflict in space. You can choose your title. We'll decide the title later. So first of all, let's start a bit with why is space studied, or how is space studied in geopolitics. When studying geopolitics, there are different realms. We have land, air, sea. These are the three historical, analyzed, Earth-based realms. And now, well, actually not now, but the most recent one was space in the 20th century, development in the 20th century. And the most recent one arguably can be cyber, although this is not really
a physical domain.
Exactly. It's not a physical domain, but we have this space realm. What can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, exactly. Like you say, traditionally in geopolitics, we talk about the different domains. For space, what's really important is like the atmospheric layers. Basically, like we can talk about positions in orbit, orbital zones, which become highly important in terms of what satellites can go there. We have one zone, and in the low Earth orbit, we have the geostationary orbit zones. These are very important positions in space. And then likewise, there's important positions for being able to travel through space by rockets, including being able to potentially move beyond into colonizing the moon, and then use that as a springboard to go further into space than we can from Earth-based launches and things like this. So I think conceptually you have to think of space then as this physical domain with specific points which are more important than others.
It's got different heights, basically.
Exactly.
Then you go to the farthest height, which is outer space, but it's not defined as far as I...
No.
It's defined by science, but it's not defined in like legal terms.
Exactly.
Well, then why are we talking about this? We were talking about this because...
Well, so in February this year, there was a big rush into the media because the U.S. White House National Secretary or spokesman...
Chairman of the House of the Intelligence Committee.
The chairman of the House of the Intelligence Committee in the U.S., a Republican speaker there, he expressed concerns that Russia was developing a nuclear weapon to be based in space, or a weapon of mass destruction anyway, to be based in space, and from there could be used, deployed and then used against American assets and potentially pose a huge threat to the existing security architecture that we have governing rules around space and things like this.
Okay, then let's talk about, just have a brief summary. Like historically, the two space superpowers, when we talk about geopolitics, we usually have the terms, the power competition and so on. Historically, these two space superpowers have been the United States and previously Soviet Union. They competed throughout the entire Cold War in what we later call the space race, which ended in like many achievements by both of them. First man in space, first man in the moon, all of this. And during this time of the Cold War, many agreements were signed, and it enabled an era of collaboration where the International Space Station was full collaboration and so on. And now we're talking about competition. What has changed in this matter?
Yeah, so I think if we think now, there's been a huge push and there's lots more satellites being placed into space. The US has become the dominant space power, obviously with the collapse of the Soviet Union. They didn't have the resources to be able to keep funding the very expensive space programs. And so US has maintained this very big advantage, I'd say, in the realm of space, in terms of controlling space and having the advanced technologies needed to operate into space. we've seen private players come into the game. We've seen other countries start to get more involved, such as China, such as India, Europe as well, to the European Space Agency, like all these different players now going into space. But what has always been important, I think, since the initial signing of the Outer Space Treaty in 1967 at the UN, was that was an agreement not to use any weapons of mass destruction or nuclear weapons in space, and not to deploy them in space as well, because that would create a new potential space race, an arms race, basically, which the fallout of actually having anything happen there could be devastating for the foreseeable future, for hundreds of years, make zones of space almost inaccessible to us, which we could go into in a little bit. But I think if we look like the history of space weapons, they were used like early in the 1960s. There was testing around the same time when the USSR and the United States were developing their nuclear programs. Both of them did do tests of a nuclear warhead in space. I believe the US one in 1962 knocked out, I think, 8 of the 22 satellites that were in orbit at the time. And now,
imagine.
Exactly. So, and
22.
There's only 22 satellites in space. So it managed to knock out 8 in one explosion. And now we've got tens of thousands of satellites in orbit, and to knock out a large number of them would then create these like debris clusters. And so you can see like the impact of such a thing would become quite catastrophic.
Then let's go a little bit into this weaponry, and then we're going to talk about the debris. We're going to talk about the potential problematics that it may arise. But so we know that Earth-to-base weaponry exists already, targeting satellites, for example, and it doesn't just exist within the US or Russia's arsenal. China has developed these weapons, and they successfully tried them, tested them. India did too. Are these 4 countries the only ones? I think these are the only 4 countries that have this capacity, no?
That have proven capability in terms of...
Then how does space-to-space nuclear weapon change the game in this matter?
So I think that the big fear is that if by having a space-based nuclear weapon or a weapon capable of attacking it kind of will act much faster. You can't really prevent it, whereas a Earth-based launch will be probably more targeted at a particular satellite. That's how they've done the test before. You basically shoot down a single satellite that you're targeting, whereas these ones would sit up there and then create a huge threat ongoing if it was the threat that it could be used, and then it would be much more indiscriminate, I believe. So it would take out like a vast amount of satellites in one quick succession, basically, and then and that would bring down like a lot of our communications networks, a lot of the security architecture and things around that. So I think the risk posed by it is potentially much more, and the risk is that if it was deployed, there has to be some sort of response to counter the threat, because otherwise it's...
Yeah, because this is not like when we think about MADS, for example, mutual assured destruction, that was like in the event of a nuclear attack by one of this was the theory developed already in the Cold War, like basically when one of the main holders of nuclear weapons would attack the other one would launch their weapons. It would be mutually assured destruction. But in this case, you cannot really respond with another nuclear weapon because you will only be creating more chaos.
Exactly. And that's the thing. The use of such a weapon in space would destroy the area for everybody. You end up with huge debris clouds, which would take out everybody's satellites. So there's no reason why any country would necessarily want to use it unless they're kind of... It's a very desperate act, like to use that, because you're not only taking out your enemy's satellites and everything, you're taking all your own ones as well. So
yeah, or even ones that are like from other countries,
exactly,
from private entities that have nothing to do with that.
And then potentially creating a situation where no rockets could even go into space because the risk of hitting debris would be...
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the risk of the debris. What is debris, basically?
So space debris is like anything that's in orbit, but basically by human design, and that has the potential to cause or massive damage. Because you can imagine like these things in orbit are going astronomical speeds around the Earth, like 18,000.
And straightforward. It's not like...
Exactly. 18,000 kilometers per hour, basically. So even if it's a tiny little small, say just like a bolt or something, if that hits into another satellite, it will explode the whole thing basically because of the potential energy, because of the pace that's going in, and cause catastrophic damage. So like,
Yeah,
there is
like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like literally the acceleration is exponential. It doesn't stop, no? Like, unless there's gravitational.
they stay consistent. Like, so they're not accelerating necessarily. They're like always going pretty consistent speed. It's like they're constantly falling from the gravity effect and then staying in orbit. But
Okay.
yeah, and I think there has been space debris from previous incidents, like say the anti-satellite tests that have been done. They create big clouds of debris, like all these minute particles, bits of metal, bits of shrapnel, and these are all tracked by different space agencies to be able to make sure that they're not going to come into collision with satellites that are up there, because it can have this cascading effect where one collision then creates a new pile of debris, which then creates much higher increased likelihood of further collision.
Like a butterfly effect.
Exactly. So it would just exponentially get larger and larger until such a situation where we've got billions of pieces of particles going around the Earth in orbit that would prevent any future satellites from being able to operate there.
Okay. Then we know that in the past, the USA pushed for a ban on Earth to Space testing in the UN General Assembly. However, only 153 countries signed. Among the non-signatories were India, Russia, and China, who had already tested these capabilities, and who are so far the only ones able to do is. What can you tell us about this ban? Like, because if it's a ban on something that you cannot do.
Yeah, so I mean, the US voluntarily said that they will not conduct any anti-satellite tests because of the risk posed going forward, and tried to use this as pressure to stop these three states from doing tests. I think we saw in 2021, I believe India did a test in low Earth orbit.
2008 is China too.
Yep. Yeah. And so 2019, that recently was India, and then 2022, Russia actually shot down a satellite in higher orbit and created lots of debris. So I think the US is trying to use its own restraint from testing these weapons to politically pressure these countries to sign on. It has been a gradual process of getting more and more countries to sign on. However, without those three big ones, like you say, it's not going to be particularly effective, because those are the three ones that you want to be signing on to say that they're not going to carry out these tests.
Out of curiosity, because other countries that could potentially, for example, do this come to mind, like obviously the European Union, like certain countries in the EU, or the European Union as a whole. But I know that, for example, Indonesia also has some space plans, Brazil, Japan,
Korea, for sure.
but they haven't really invested in that military. It's more like research.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there is, of course, some dual-use technologies where you can use research as well as like for military application, things like surveillance and intelligence gathering, all these sorts of things, which are very important to have, are guided by space. And if we talk now, maybe we'll go on to like why now Russia would want to do this, because the US, as I said, is a dominant power in space. They have this gigantic lead in being able to operate their military applications on Earth. So all their high-tech weaponry, the new fighters, everything is run by these systems which rely on these military satellites in space, and gives the US a massive advantage on the battlefield.
Yeah. But even through private entities, no? Because it's not just like the United States, but for example, they can also rely on Starlink and...
Yeah, exactly. I guess more flexibility, I guess, to be able to use by having these other options. But the rate at which satellites have been launched has been exponentially growing over the last 10 years. And so the US has got this massive lead in terms of space, positioning, in terms of space power and projection, force projection. And so for Russia, I think it's like maybe put it there as a threat, and then in a sign of desperation, they could trigger it and then cause basically leveling the field. So the way they see exactly. So everyone goes to zero.
Yeah.
I believe that's the way that they see the situation, as things haven't gone well for them in Ukraine as they had hoped, and like they're now thinking about different ways that they could potentially claw back some advantage, I guess, against the US and allies.
We have mentioned previously in this podcast that most of information goes through underwater cables, through underwater pipes. In the end, basically, I think it's around 80 to 90% of all the information sharing, like internet, goes through underwater cables. So these satellites are also important, but let's say, like, it would create a problem, but it would not be like cybernetic fallout, basically, you know?
There are some systems which rely specifically on satellites. So say our banking systems, all banking transactions operate...
GPS, no?
GPS as well, exactly. GPS also only uses the satellite technology that we have. So there's some systems which would go down completely if this was to... in the event of some sort of trigger of a space weapon that would make the space uninhabitable for satellites and things like this. So there is some things which would be there's no mitigating or no way you could get around it, I think, if it was to happen.
And so this, as I understand, this is my cyanide pill in the end. Like, I cannot do much more, so I level it to 0 with everyone else. But why would Russia, you've mentioned, why would Russia want to get this?
I think they're trying to see it as a bit of a deterrent strategy, potentially to push back against the US and European allies because of their own issues domestically and within the ongoing war in Ukraine. I think that the intelligence basically reported that Putin ordered the development of this weapon to his military generals as a response to the lack of progress in Ukraine and potentially out of frustration at the assistance in the intelligence that the Ukrainians were getting from NATO through the use of these advanced satellite capabilities. So that was the potential, the impetus for the beginning of the development of this weapon. And I mean, it's important to say, like, this has not been fully developed yet, and it's not in operation. The US Intelligence Committee basically said that people shouldn't be immediately and imminently concerned about any potential immediate threat. But I think it is important, like, to think about long-term, trying to prevent this sort of arms race in space, which could have the catastrophic effects.
And apart from this UNGA resolution that we mentioned before, has the USA or any other actors tried to take measures in order to prevent Russia or any other actor to develop these space nukes?
Well, I think we haven't said it as well. Like, just a few weeks ago, in April, the US and Japan both put forward a resolution at the UN Security Council, calling on countries to prevent arms race in outer space. And Russia vetoed this resolution, which I think for the US was a clear indication that they are still pushing forward with this idea. China abstained, so it is complex now, like, how they could potentially pressure them more. I think there needs to be a response from the USA, and they're trying to work out exactly what that would look like to respond. Because, I mean, them putting another weapon themselves into space doesn't really fix the problem, because it's, as I say, it's a mutually assured destruction thing. If anyone has a weapon in space like that, it would be catastrophic for everybody. So I think they're trying to use political pressure here to stop Russia developing that. And I think we'll see things such as sanctions, trying to limit their access to the materials required to develop the space weapon. Basically, yeah.
It's not like you can really stop Russia from developing.
Exactly. I mean, as like this technology has existed since 1960s, where they were able to trigger a nuclear weapon in space. What the question is, like, then I think Russia's trying to develop something that could be sitting there in space to be used as a last resort kind of gamble. And that technology might be more difficult to develop and like very costly, but I think the trajectory is there that's definitely the concern for the US, for Washington.
And just to make it clear, these space nukes, as I like to call them, because I think it sounds fun, it's not. These are designed to be space-to-space weapons. It's not like they would be launched space to Earth.
that's the understanding, I think, for the intelligence community. There was some also fears about a space-based weapon that could then strike down at Earth, but I do not believe that is exactly what's being developed now. I think it's a space-to-space weapon. As I said, we've got Earth-to-space weapons which have been used before, but also create large problems, and I think they're more costly. They're probably easier to be intercepted, and they wouldn't do as widespread damage, I guess, as this potential space-to-space weapon.
Well, there's a lot of technical questions actually that arise to me now. Like, first of all, because you obviously need some technology to keep the nuke from exploding. Even like you need to keep it in contact. You need to refrigerate it and stuff like this.
Because I mean, even on Earth, like nuclear weapons, they have to have like
there's a checkup, like constant checkup.
Exactly.
Blah, blah. So yeah, it is actually. And to me, what triggers the most sense of threat from this is that debris, like having a butterfly debris, like a butterfly effect debris that could actually quiet most of the satellite capacity, or that even would disallow us to go farther into space, because if this debris were to happen, we wouldn't even be able to launch
exactly rockets, because they wouldn't be able to travel through that zone without too high a risk of like hitting debris and then causing catastrophic damage to them. So yeah, it's an overarching problem. Actually, it's not just in the security. And I mean, this is something that's why I think if we like listen to White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby, he's said in categorical terms how seriously the US was taking the threat of this, and trying to work out the best course of action to respond. But it is difficult to see exactly what they can do to.
Yeah, because it's not like you can again launch another nuke somewhere else or like respond with like the same force or stuff like this. No, it would be in the area of prevention of this to happen, or contention in the case it happened. It's not, it's another realm though.
It is, exactly. It's a highly concerning issue, but it's something that the US will definitely be continuing to work on their response to the threat, I guess.
So for now, what we can see is that, there are already some information pointing at the fact that Russia may actually already have this weapon in space.
Or under development.
So yeah, I mean, we cannot really foresee how it's going to develop. This is actually
it will come from like political pressure for sure, and trying to isolate Russia even from China, like using China and their leverage with Russia potentially to talk them down from being able to do this. I think China has to be the important player as part of the US calculations, like working with China to prevent this, because it's a no-win situation for anyone, including China would suffer catastrophic consequences as a result of any sort of such weapon as well. So I think that's kind of the approach that will be taken. I think using political power to pressure Russia to not be able to do this. Obviously, the US doesn't have that much leverage over Russia at the moment, but using these other countries to potentially do that.
Okay, then, first of all, if you like the topic about outer space, we actually haven't touched it too much in the podcast. I think this is the first one. Actually.
We did geopolitics of space with.
We did geopolitics of space with Bohumil Dobos. But yeah, if you like the topic, because there's actually more interesting things like
potential colonization of space.
Exactly, potential colonization of the moon, asteroids, Mars, legal aspects, technical aspects, blah blah, that we could actually talk about. So if you like it, just let us know in the comment. And just as always, thank you very much, Ronan, for being here with me today.
Thank you as well, and thanks to everyone listening. And we'll be back shortly for another episode. So thanks for listening to the Geopolitical Pickle.
Ciao, ciao. The Geopolitical Pickle is created by Ronan Wordsworth and Juan Francisco Muñoz. Follow us on Instagram at The Geopolitical Pickle or Twitter at The Geopickle for more content, and follow us on every podcast platform.